Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Sinead Says podcast. This week we have Niall Breslin, which is one of Ireland's most inspiring mental health advocates and public speakers. He is also best-selling author, podcaster, musician, philanthropist, former professional athlete, and founder of charity A Lust for Life. But just before we go into today's podcast, I just wanted to thank the sponsors, BetterHelp, for always sponsoring the podcast. They've been sponsoring the podcast since day one. So thank you guys to anyone who has signed up. And they're an online therapy platform where you can get counselors and the therapists online. You can talk to them through Zoom. You can talk to them through text. It's very accessible. It's literally an app on your phone. You click a time where you're able to talk to them. It matches with them. They'll give you the timetable and you just book in and you have your therapy. And I usually do like little 6-week stints and stuff whenever I'm going through stuff like breakups or moving to new places or going through any kind of change. I usually just do like a wee 6-week stint. So you can get 10% off with betterhelp.com/Sinead. That is betterhelp.com/Sinead. Now, there is a lot. You do a lot, I have to say. And even when I was looking it up, I was like, there is just so much more and more and more to you. But what best describes you and where are you at in your life? Because I think, you've expanded your identity in so many aspects, and you might have changed your identity in so many aspects. So where are you at this moment?
I think my mum would say my CV should probably read "throw as much shit in a wall and see what sticks," which is a pretty accurate description of where I've gone in my life. I do have an issue with the needs that people have to label people and say, this is what you are and this is what you do. And this is all I can understand of you. So you can't be in any other box. And I wasn't raised like that. And hence, I started my career as a professional rugby player and then kind of moved into banking for about 5 minutes and I fired myself because I was that shit at it. But then kind of into music. My mum was a music teacher. And then into TV, then into writing. So above everything, when you kind of condense it all down, my work is generally in the creative area. It's anything creative, anything that requires creativity. Even when it comes to setting up the charity, what we were doing, which was probably the most difficult thing I've done, it requires creative thinking and how you solve problems with creativity. And it's something I'm really passionate about teaching people, is that if you can anyone can do it. Anyone can be creative if they're passionate about what it is that they do. But for me, that was the kind of the calling card. And then ultimately went back into academia and where I still am, and now just about to embark on my PhD in the area of that I was brought into, which was the area of mindfulness and early intervention and how it can be used in terms of either clinical interventions or just interventions for people who just need to know where the fuck they're going in life and where their heads are at. And I think that is ultimately, I had no idea that's where I would go. I was brought there. I was kind of, the wind was taking me there and I went with it. But I love it. I kind of, when I started to go on the journey for my own kind of the shit show that my own mind was in, it was mindfulness that kind of started to make sense for me. I hated it at the start. I used to panic. I couldn't meditate. I panic disorder for about 15 years of my life. And every time I focused on my breath, I'd panic. So the last thing I wanted to do was use my breath as an anchor of attention. And it took a long time to get over that fear. And I remember my coach at the time and my therapist, psychologist, and he was like, this has been around 2,500 years. There's more to it. Don't just take the idea of something that an app has just told you. There's much more depth to this. And that's where my journey started and led me on, back to study it and to teach it and to bring people through, mindfulness-based stress reduction and cognitive-based therapies and stuff like that, which I love.
Yeah. And take us back to, because obviously you're so passionate, like you're probably one of the most passionate people I know about mental health. And it's so amazing to see, especially a male, because you don't get that as much anymore. It's more women sort of pushing it, but you are literally one of the most passionate males I know for mental health. But as we know, mountains aren't made without a shake of the earth. And usually it comes from expert of experience. So And I always say anyone who's pushing mental health, like including myself, has been to a dark place and needed to come out of it. So, what is your story through this? Like, for the listeners to know, like, why you are here.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very strange one, and it took me a long time with a lot of professionals to kind of figure out what was wrong. I always believed that I had this form of post-traumatic stress disorder. I moved to Israel when I was 13, and my dad was in the UN, and like there was complete peace in the Middle East until the day we landed in Tel Aviv. There was like 15 years of kind of peace in Israel, which is pretty unusual. And what is now referred to as the 9-day war started. And we drove up right into the middle of it. I just remember just thinking to myself that you could see the first thing I noticed is that like 18-year-olds had semi-automatic rifles. They just carried them, and they have to, because you had to be in the army. And then I was there for about 3 days. And in the middle of the night, we're told to get into the bomb shelters. The Hezbollah and the IDF were shelling each other. And I just remember the ground shaking and the windows shaking and planes going over our heads. And my dad saying to me, go back to sleep, son. We're okay. We're safe here. And he knew we were safe. Like he was a weapons observer. He knew. I didn't. And that was the night the switch went on in my life. It was a really vicious moment that kind of felt like something shifted in my body. And I went through most of my life believing that that was the real driver of what was wrong with me. But actually, when I went deeper and into the weeds, which you have to do, and the last thing you want to do generally is go into the weeds, because I always say avoidance is the root of all disorder. We avoid, we avoid, we avoid. And that's what I had done. But actually, it was a very abusive primary school. I went to a Christian Brothers primary school in Mullingar called St. Mary's, which was notoriously violent. And a few of the Christian Brothers there were particularly grim. And I just, I was beaten up quite a few times with the teachers. And there was one particular beating that I got that still stays with me, where I was hit in the face with a letter for eating in class. And I remember going home and I had a big graze and cut under my eye. And the shopkeeper asked me what happened. And I was like, I was eating in class. And he was like, well, you deserved it. And I just remember thinking, you're in on this. Like, society is backing this shit up. What's going on? And what happened was, you take that from a child. The most basic need of a child is to feel safe. If you remove that from a child, that's why when you look at things like child homelessness in Ireland, please look past the number and the figure. Look at the lifetime of that child, because that's what happens. When you take safety from a young child, it will affect them for the rest of their life unless they actually do something about it or address it, which is what I ultimately had to do. But combine that with what happened in Israel, and then my teenage years. I remember the first time I mentioned mental health. My hero, Kurt Cobain, died in 1994. Obsessed with Kurt Cobain, like most, puberty-ridden teenagers that in the 90s, like myself. And I went into the Christian Brother in the secondary school, and I was like, what happened? This is like when we saw a picture of Kurt Cobain with a gun on the front of a paper. I'd never really heard the word suicide in my life. And because it was a cardinal sin, like, you just didn't mention it. And I remember saying to the teacher, and he nearly foamed at the mouth, and he punched my desk and he called him a coward. And that was my mental health education. So that just drove me further and further in. And then there was a psychiatric hospital in Mullingar called St. Norman's. And all that went through my head is, that's where they'll put me. If I tell the truth, that's where they'll put me. Because at this point, I was chronic insomniac. My hair was falling out. I always say the only time I ever said it to my mother, and I have amazing parents, like they would have completely understood. But my mum said when I was 15, the only time I said anything was when I said, it feels like my skin crawls all the time, which was a pretty good description of it. But I carried that, and I carried it into college. I carried it into professional sport. It ultimately led to me retiring from rugby due to just chronic and debilitating depression. I couldn't talk about what that was. I was taking drugs. I was taking Xanax, which terrified I'd be drug tested. Hardly a performance enhancing drug, but I was living with all this silence. And I retired from rugby, left the band. Everything just slowly broke down, and then I hit rock bottom. And then when you hit rock bottom, you have two choices. You stay there or you find a way out. But this was all masked in silence. And you asked me why I do what I do. It didn't have to be that way. That's why I do what I do. And I do it for the 15-year-old me who wished somebody said something when I was 15, anything to make me feel like I wasn't like complete and utterly broken. And I made it my absolute drive to make sure that any teenager in this country or anywhere else that feels or felt the way I feel knows that they're not on their own and there's things that can be done to help them. And that's really where it all came from.
And then whenever you obviously, like, to be honest, sometimes like I kind of know what that feels like as well when you're distracting yourself. And I know a lot of people in that mode of distracting, where you said you did football and you had everything going for you. But where's the point of acknowledgement that you're actually, not doing so well? And, and how do you climb out of there? Because I think the first thing is the awareness of how you're feeling. Because for me as well, I had the very similar thing, like insomnia, no sleeping. And I think that kind of piled on top of everything until and I was kind of not showing anyone, not telling anyone. I felt like I had a lot of pride. I didn't want to tell anyone I was feeling. So I was kind of alone as well. But there was actually just one, I always talk about this one day where I just couldn't go to work. I literally couldn't get out of bed. And that was kind of it for me. And then I think it was just actually telling one person that really, that's the only thing. And then the healing began, because it was like, I accepted it, I admitted it, and now I'm going to begin healing. So, how did you recognize what was going on? And then what helped you, I suppose? What were the tools that you used to get out of this?
The thing that happened to me was, like, when I retired from rugby, went into music, signed to Universal Records, started gigging, touring, and I could feel it happening again. I could feel the sense of sabotage that I would bring to everything I loved, to every person I loved, to every profession I loved, because I was terrified. And when you look back, so when I was in this, here's my big therapy lesson. I did this thing called schema therapy, and it was this life trap that I kept doing every time I felt that I was getting close to somebody or I was doing something that meant something to me. I would sabotage it. And the reason I did that was, when I was a kid, I learned to completely detach emotionally, because that was a good survival tool to use, given the fact that I had grown men beating me up. It was easier to feel nothing than to feel everything. And that was the mindset I went into. And then I carried that through adulthood and through music. So the band broke up, and then I moved to London. I had this really great job as a songwriter with the management, Spice Girls management. It was a huge opportunity with 19 Entertainment and Simon Fuller, but I just got sick again. And you can't outrun this. You can move to London, you can move wherever the fuck you want. It doesn't matter. You need to address this thing that just lives with you. And London changed my entire trajectory of life, because I fell into addiction, prescription medication. I was completely and utterly addicted to sleeping pills at the height of it, and with that came quite physiological issues that I started having. I started getting quite sick. My skin got really bad. I looked like a 13-year-old. I had boils on my skin. I had adult acne for the first time. So it was all very physical. And then I got offered this job as a coach in the TV show The Voice in Ireland. And the reason I took the contract is because I had no money. I was skint, and I couldn't afford to fly home. And I was like, listen, if they're going to fly me home every Saturday, I'm fucking in. Let's go for it. And I signed that contract. And all that went through my head is, you're going to have a panic attack on live television. You're going to have a panic attack on live television. I lived with that every single day. And right enough, 10 minutes before a live show, an absolute belter of a panic attack. And I just remember lying on the floor and, covered in, but sorry for being graphic, vomit. My eyes were bloodshot. I was just lying there wondering, how in the name of God am I going to get onto TV now? I couldn't ring the 6 o'clock news and say to Anne Doyle, can you give me 20 minutes to get my shit together here? And I had to go on. And I did go on. I cleaned myself up somehow and did the show. And that was my rock bottom. And it was after that moment where I said, no more. This is it. And it was that moment that my family told me, it's time to talk about this with people, because all your energy has gone into disguising this all your life. So I did. And I told everybody, and I wrote on a piece of paper, I'm going to lose my job and I'm going to have to leave the country. I accepted that was just going to be the thing I have to do once I come out publicly with this. I didn't have to do that. Of course I didn't, but I was that terrified that the reaction, this was 8-9 years ago, nobody was really, it's a huge subject now, but really nobody was talking about this. Even then, Conor Cusack was the only other man that I knew in Ireland that had said this out loud. So yeah, I'd expected it all to happen. None of it happened. And then that led me on my journey to, I don't use the word recovery. I still live with this. I still live with it.
Mm-hmm.
I still work very, very hard. I still have to be very, very wise and you talk about mindfulness. What's the most key thing mindfulness teaches us as individuals is self-awareness. And when you have self-awareness, you have the ability to choose. And, as Viktor Frankl said, in that choice comes your growth. That's the power of self-awareness. You could be completely lost in yourself and you don't even know why. And that to me is what mindfulness taught me, was the ability to sit with the good, the bad, and the ugly and actually go, what the fuck? Why am I like this? Why am I feeling like this today? What has happened? How have I reacted? What are my behaviors here? And that's a game changer for somebody who had his head up his hole for so long.
Yeah. So you think mindfulness was kind of like the first step, and for anyone here, sometimes people do get confused by the word mindfulness, especially, mindfulness versus meditation. What would you, just because you have a master's in mindfulness as well, so you're probably very clued up on mindfulness. So what would you describe mindfulness for the listeners today?
Well, one of the biggest issues I have with mindfulness, and when I was studying it, is I think the language around it is very outdated. I think the language is very hard to translate to people who might be either scared of it or couldn't be arsed doing it. So for me, the psychological definition of mindfulness is paying attention to the present moment without judgment. Now, that doesn't mean a lot, really. If you're working with a 14-year-old, they're going to go, what's that mean? So the definition I sometimes use is set foot into an ice cold shower, and when the water cuts the arse off you, tell me, are you thinking about yesterday or what you have to do tomorrow? No, it's just presence. And the reason presence is so powerful is because the modern world has conditioned us to be anything but mindful. It's the opposite of mindful. It doesn't want us there, because when you're mindful, you cannot be manipulated. You cannot be sold to. You cannot be scrolling. And the reason it feels so difficult and challenging is because the modern mind each day, and the CEO of Netflix, Reed Hastings, said that the biggest competitor in the marketplace was sleep. So we've commodified sleep. So there's a war for our attention. And the least you own of your own attention, the literally more rudderless you will feel in life. You will feel utterly rudderless. And that to me is mindfulness. Mindfulness has two sides. It's informal mindfulness and it's formal mindfulness. Informal mindfulness is that cup of coffee or that good chat with a mate where everything in the world stops and nothing else matters in that moment. That's informal. We have beautiful moments of that in our day that we can take. Formal mindfulness is meditation. So it's the practice of meditation and the practice of attentional control. But in mindfulness, what we teach is insight meditation. So, there's concentration meditation, essentially, which would be just focusing on your breath, just to kind of calm you down or to get you a bit more present. And then there's insight meditation, which actually gives you insight into the type of mind you have, the type of person you are. And that's where I think it becomes really powerful, because what I do with people, say on the mindfulness-based stress reduction or MBSR courses, you'll get them to sit with discomfort, and you'll get them to deconstruct discomfort, and in a way that's safe and it's assessed. And often in my assessments, I will say to the person, you're not ready for this. It's too raw here for you. There's too much grief, or there's too much pain, and maybe meditation and mindfulness is not the right thing for you to do, because that to me is what we refer to as spiritual bypassing, where a person thinks just because they're meditating that they don't need to deal with the shit that they have going on in life. And you can see it in all different levels of spirituality. You see it in Christianity where, people will say it's God's will. It's not fucking God's will, lads. That's the spiritual. That's just giving an excuse. It's the same in mindfulness and meditation and Buddhism. You cannot use mindfulness as something to sidestep something that you've been avoiding all your life. You need to sit and work with that with a therapist. You need to work with a psychologist, somebody who's good at what they do. Or maybe it's just a peer. who's just listening to you burn the ear off them for fucking 20 minutes. Whatever it is, sometimes in our assessments in mindfulness, we won't bring people into it. It's just they're not ready or they're too raw. But in saying that, when they are ready, it can change their life.
Yeah, because especially like in meditation as well, if I'm going through something, I won't meditate, even though like I'm a meditation teacher, just because I'm not ready to deal with the feelings. Like sometimes I will try and distract myself. And then when I go in, I'm ready. But then there is a number of people who genuinely shouldn't be meditating at certain times as well. And like that is something that you do talk about as well. And I'm a meditation teacher and I'm always pushing people to meditate and stuff, but there is a certain type of people that can't meditate or meditate in different ways. I personally, especially with this generation, meditation is very, very difficult for most beginners because they're literally sitting running on monkey mind constantly. So when they sit down to meditate, they're really, really struggling. Do you think there's a certain amount of people that shouldn't be meditating? Do you think it's just a matter of time? Or I don't know, when you're in like in different trainings say different things, like, you know, PTSD is very, very different from meditation. But what's your recommendation there?
I think this is where I worry, where it becomes this sweeping panacea that we start applying to everybody and anybody. It's really important with meditation that a couple of things. I will always work with somebody one-on-one first to figure out what's going on for them, what genuinely is going on in their life. A prime example is, I remember my master's teacher, he's a psycho-oncologist. He works with people end of life, but he teaches them meditation, mindfulness, cancer, end of life. He's an incredible man, Paul Dalton. And he was telling me about this particular family, this guy that he was helping through mindfulness, and he was really struggling with body scans and anything on the body. And when he actually did, you know, sat with them, he found out this kid had been abused. And he had a horrible relationship with his body. And the last thing he wanted to do was pay attention to it. With that knowledge, you assess. And then, you know, I said, if you're using, which he was doing as a kind of clinical intervention almost, it's a different thing. But for most people, I believe I can help them get into presence in a very, so one of the things we do, right? I'm going to just say two things that might help people. So there's principles of practice. This is the first thing I teach. The principles of practice of mindfulness. And these are the attitudes that you bring when you sit to practice. And these become your North Star. The first one is non-judgment. So the idea of when you sit to practice and your head starts to go all over the place, see what it feels like not to go, I'm shit at this. I knew I'd be shit at this. I shouldn't be doing this. I knew I'd be terrible. Why am I bothering? They're all judgments. So let them go for this 10 minutes. See what it feels like not to judge yourself. Second, non-striving. You're not trying. There's no Olympic Games for meditation. You don't need to, you know, if you set a goal for meditation, two things happen. You can be pissed off if you don't get there, or you can limit where it could actually go. The third one is obviously beginner's mind, or bringing that level of curiosity to your practice. Why that helps is because if the heavier, intense feelings come up, curiosity can soften them. So if you feel really anxious, actually act like you've never felt anxious before and go, that's really interesting. I'm feeling that in my belly or my chest, and explore it. So that takes the heat out of it a little bit. The other one is letting go, or chuck it in the fuck it bucket is what I call it. You know, a million thoughts are going to come at you. See what it feels like to let them go. You don't hold on to them. So what I'm going to say to people in meditation, when you sit to meditate, literally to a person, probably you as well, Sinead, and myself, and I'm relatively skilled at this. I've been doing it a long time. When I sit to meditate and I close my eyes, my head just tears off. It goes. And what happens is, I'll give you an example. I forgot to ring Mary. Oh, fuck, Mary already hates me. It's going to be so awkward. When I get a pizza, I'm eating so much shite. Is there many calories in it? But will I go to the gym before working? Now you're down a rabbit hole. Now you're anxious. Now you've created an emotional charge. So the metaphor I use is, do you know those leads that puppies have, that they can go so far and then they lock and you bring them back?
Yeah.
That's your mind. You know, if you have a new puppy and your mind, and the puppy goes and explores, you're not going to yank him back and go, come back here, you little bollocks. You'll be lovely and gentle with your puppy. You'll go, come back here, bud. You know, I know you're humping the neighbor's leg or you're pissing on fucking whatever. Come back here, lad. Come on. You wouldn't be angry with them. That's what I want you to do with your mind. Your mind, don't let your mind go too far. Just for 3 minutes to sit and notice that mind of yours is moving. And the minute it moves, this is how you respond to it. I forgot to ring Mary off, back to the breath. And it's in that moment that you are creating mindfulness. That's where you get, if you look at all the science and the neuroscience around mindfulness, it's in that moment of awareness that you're building attentional control. You're not trying to stop that happening. What you're trying to stop doing is following it. The other thing to remember at mindfulness, it doesn't have to be the breath. It doesn't have to be the body. It could be a mantra. It also can be a visualization. You know, if you look into the actual Buddhism, it wasn't always present moment focus. It was like a visualization. So it could be something like a round of golf. I know it's ridiculous, but if you're really anxious, play a round of golf in your head, or remember that day that you just had the best day of your life, and lock your attention on it. And what you're doing is you're trying to get the brain and the mind into this neocortex, out of the limbic system, out of the amygdala hijack, as we call it, which it just feels like we're in it all the time. And I say this to people, what's really scary for me now is a lot of people don't even know what it feels like to be calm anymore.
Yeah.
That's where I'm scared, because we've created what I call the hypervigilant nation, where it's it's crisis after crisis. Everything we see on the news is framed in threat and risk. You know, be it cold weather here in Ireland 2 weeks ago. You swear to God it was it was like, it was -2 or 3 degrees, and the language was like destructive, extreme. Everything is threat now. Everything. No wonder we're shitting ourselves all the time. And that's what I'm trying to teach, is get out of that and get into this space, you know?
And like, that's the problem as well. I always say, you know, stress and anxiety is not the problem. It's living in stress and anxiety, living in chronic stress and chronic anxiety is what's making us really, really sick. And we're not even realizing that we're in it because we're so used to being in it. You know, people used to come home years ago, like say your granny and granddad, they kick their boots off. There's not really much. Like, I don't even think my granny and granddad had TV, boots off, fires up, and they're literally decompressing their nervous system at this point, and they're learning. And then we come home, we've got phones, we're looking at our ex-boyfriend's Instagram, we get emails, we bring work home, there's constant stress, there's news on the TV, and we're living in this fight or flight. We're not sleeping properly because we're on our phones, we're distracted, we're bombarded by content all day. Like, we are more than ever need to decompress, because we are constantly in this fight or flight. And when we're in this fight or flight, this is when we get sick. This is when problems arise. And we need to be, more than ever as well, have those 20 minutes of meditation. You think that, you know, years ago they need it, but we need it more than anyone. But it's so, so, so difficult to get people to sit down with their minds in this day and age, because we're so used to being distracted, being bombarded with content, and with very little attention spans because of how we grew up with phones and stuff like that. But I always say to people as well about monkey mind, like, the first thing somebody does when they try to meditate, or if they're coming to me, they're like, oh, I've tried to meditate. I went on YouTube. It didn't work. I can't calm my mind. And it's very, very frustrating, because people do need a guide and they do need a teacher in order to, you know, sort of get the knack of meditating. And when they go in, I always say, you're going in there and saying that you can't do it because you can't turn your mind off, but you understand that meditation brings awareness to your monkey mind, but your monkey mind is running your life everywhere else. So if you sit down, that first day, I don't know about you, but the first day I ever meditated, I wanted to scratch my eyeballs out because I just didn't want to be there, and I didn't want to, but the thing that kept me going and kept me going through the process of meditating is the benefits and how amazing they were. And all I did was read the benefits, read the research, and I was just like, I have to do this. Like, even looking at the difference in people's brains with 30 years meditating, you know, just everything about it just made sense, and I just couldn't ignore it anymore. So if anyone's listening here, like, we're sitting here talking about all the hard things of sitting down trying to calm your mind, but let's tell them about the actual benefits on what it brought for you and your clients.
Yeah, it's really fair. And I think it's also probably a good thing to say here as well. If you are feeling rinsed and exhausted and just completely blitzed by the world. Good, you should be. It's been carnage for the last 3 years, and that's quite a healthy human response to everything that we've all had to do. Like, even I said that to my family at Christmas. It's like, if I told you like 3 years ago we'd have to go through this thing where we never didn't get to see each other, we couldn't try all that kind of shit. Do you think, what would you have said? And they said we wouldn't have been able to do it, but we did do it. So I always believe that we're a little tougher than we think we are. And John O'Donoghue is an Irish poet and philosopher, and he's at the core of all my work. Everything I do is through his work. Anam Cara, he unfortunately passed away pretty recently, and my biggest regret is I never met him. And he has this saying, he says, there's a place within all of us that's never been wounded. And ultimately, what I try to teach with mindfulness is to teach people where that place is. There's just a place within everybody that no matter what's going on, you can revert to it and you can come back to it. And it's ever present. It will never leave you. It's always there for you. And that to me is a really special thing to know, that no matter how chaotic my day can get or my life can get, there's a space that I can come back to. I know it's there because I found it. Now, it didn't come easy for me. And that to me was the real benefit of my own work, is that knowing that I have that in my arse pocket when I need it is such a relief. And what I need to do, if I feel the day's getting ahead of me or a week's getting ahead of me, first thing I have to do is I have to get away from people for a while. And that's not an ignorance thing. I'm not ignorant. I love people's company. I love connecting, but I need my own space and my own headspace to do this. And then I just drop into it. And it's very, very simple with me, with my meditation. I have a very simple meditation practice that is very beneficial for me. And it's essentially, it's kind of, I focus an awful lot on my body. My body is my anchor. And the thing that is the biggest anchor for me is sensation. I'm very, very open to sensation, any kind of feeling, like touch, and that's what I use. So, but back to the benefits of it. So like we can get into the kind of science behind what we see, but let me talk about the brain for a second. So I work with a guy called Dr. Michael Keane. He's an applied neuroscientist. So me and him work together on all of this elements of mindfulness. He works for a place called Actualize Clinic. And he's taught me so much about my own work and his work. And we work really well together. But he talks about the brain in 3 ways. He calls there's 3 parts of the brain. So if you can look at your brain having 3 parts, the brain stem being the first, the reptilian brain or the primal brain, whatever you want to call it, that's just the beating heart of your brain. That just pumps your blood. It pumps your lungs. It keeps you alive. It doesn't need to be told what to do. It's just working behind the scenes constantly, and it is automatic. The next part's the limbic system. The limbic system is really, really fast, but it's stupid. What it makes up in speed, it loses in kind of, it's very crude. It's very blunt. Its job is to keep you alive. That's the limbic system. So when you see a spine-crushing, lung-busting python behind a bush, you don't kind of go, I wonder if that's a spine crush. It mightn't be, because the time you've decided that, you're fucking dead. That's your limbic system. It doesn't think. It just gets you out. It's just a reaction. The next part of your brain, now this is where it gets interesting, is the neocortex, or the prefrontal cortex, the brain. Now, what happens in kind of a modern world or hypervigilance is we're stuck in this limbic system response, or an amygdala hijack is often what neuroscientists call it. And that's where you feel so uptight, where you're on automatic pilot. You're just trying to get through your day. You get to the end of your day and you don't even know where the feckin' day went. And you feel like you're anxious all the time because you're in that nervous system response, that sympathetic nervous response. What we're trying to do is to get you into the neocortex. Now, the neocortex it's a little slower than the limbic system, but it might be a bit slower, but it's where you rationally think. It's where you problem solve. It's where you actually kind of decide, okay, that's a spine-crushing, lung-busting python, but it's a bit too far away to actually be a danger to me, so I'm fine here. So it's the rational thinking part of the brain. Mm-hmm. So what we know through the neuroscience of mindfulness is that when you meditate, so seasoned meditators, people who meditate are not somebody who uses Headspace every 5 days and thinks it's going to fucking make a difference. It won't. It just won't. I have to be very clear with that. Please, I saw a research piece in the UK that really pissed me off. That was like, it was done in secondary schools and it didn't work. They did it once. It was done by
Yeah.
untrained people. The teachers weren't
Yeah.
trained in it. Look at the research and look whether it's peer reviewed and look whether it's a meta-analysis. But this research will tell you, so this was done in Harvard Business Review, that what you're doing is you're strengthening the activity in the prefrontal cortex when you meditate. So you're getting into that default space. And you're basically stopping that limbic system overwriting everything. So post-traumatic stress is when the limbic system literally overwrites the neocortex constantly, all the time, no matter what. What you're trying to do is to stop that happening. So when you meditate, you go into the prefrontal cortex, you build a stronger relationship between the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex, and that's what you want. It's that balance is where you want to be as a human being. If you have too much of either, if you're always in the prefrontal cortex, you're going to be dead, because that spine-crushing lung busting is going to be ripping your spine out your arse. If you're always in the limbic system, you're going to be hypervigilant and anxious all the time. So what we're trying to do is get into that space. And that's where that Viktor Frankl quote that everybody uses in mindfulness, between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space is your ability to choose, and in that choice is your growth. And what he actually means by that, when you get stimulated by something, somebody sends you an RC tweet or somebody says a horrible WhatsApp message to you, you can feel the emotional charge brew in the body. The worst thing you can do is react. Best thing you can do is to take a bit of space, get into that prefrontal cortex, rationally think, maybe they're having a shit day. Maybe I did do something. Maybe they didn't mean to send that to me. Now you're rationally thinking, and then react. And that is ultimately the skill of being mindful. That's mindful living, is the ability to see the world from other people's points of view, to not blindingly jump into things. I mean, you know what's happening in the brain? Now it starts to make sense. That is why I find it really interesting. And as I said, the limbic, so the brainstem, limbic system, neocortex. What you want is a balance of the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous response. But right now, for a lot of people, including myself, we're very much in the sympathetic nervous response, that fight or flight, that shit the togs, that I got to do something. And we're not enough in that parasympathetic nervous response. And mindfulness helps you get into that space.
Yeah. I always say to people as well, if meditation brings like I would call the pause, like this beautiful pause where you can react. And I always say, if you are doing a lot of shit that you regret, texting your ex when you're drunk, fighting back with someone, doing all these things, you're usually in that state. And meditation can really help you, and it can really benefit your relationships, because if you've ever said anything to your partner, your family that you regret, you're usually living in that side. Whilst if you have this pause, your relationships can really improve, because you can rationalize and you can realize that you are going to regret that in the morning. So yeah, that's probably one of my favorite benefits.
And say that as well, Sinead. Now, it's important to point, you might take that space and you might still think you're being an absolute arsehole. And I'm not, I'm actually thinking about how much of an arsehole. I'm not reacting. I'm being assertive now. I'm making a choice to call you out for the bullshit that you're putting me through. And that's, people who say to me, if I do that, they go, oh, but you're like, I thought you're into mindfulness. I said, no, that's how much of an arsehole you're acting, because I'm actually being very aware that I'm about to call you out with this. I'm not blindingly reacting to it. And that's really important to highlight. It doesn't numb you. It doesn't mute you. Yeah. It doesn't take your voice away. It gives you your voice. And the thing about it is, you lose your voice if you just throw it out at every which way for no reason. You have a much stronger voice when you're able to take some space for yourself and go, no, fuck this. I'm not having it. I'm not having it. And I'll be assertive and I'll stand up for myself. But I'm not just going to automatically react to every little trigger that comes my way. And that takes time. That is not something that comes overnight. Now, people listening to this that know me when I was 20, 21, that they'd be pissing themselves laughing. That was not me in any way. That was not my learned behavior. I had to condition myself to be a far more, to be able to take that space and be more aware of myself. And the other thing I didn't realize, I can be an absolute prick in a room. I didn't realize I was such a prick in a room with certain people. I didn't realize sometimes I can, I'm 6'6". I remember my dad used to always say to me, you're too big to be angry. He was right. I never realized how intimidating that could be to somebody. So that was even that awareness going in the room. I won't raise my voice here. I won't stand. I became aware of myself. And that is something that changed the way I live my life. And I, as I said, still need to sometimes be assertive. But when you realize the energy you bring into a room, and you realize how you use that energy for good or bad. That's self-awareness.
Yeah. And you talk there about like research on doing meditation and mindfulness in schools, etc. And you're also very, very passionate about children's mental health. You have children's books out that are teaching people how to use their emotions and stuff like that. I was actually just reading. Yeah, have you ever read that book, Breathe, by James
Mm-hmm.
Nestor? So I read that the other day, right? And it's this whole, like, I have him on like soon, and I'm going to challenge him on it as well. But so there's this whole book about breath work. You know, I'm meditation, you know, I do a bit of breath work, but you know, I am a meditation gal. And the whole book was just like the breath. And there was just one bit in it, and it said, meditation has actually been proved to improve the mental health of children and adults, but it was too hard to get people to do. So let's move on to breath work. This is literally the words that was said in the book, which really annoyed me, because if you can actually teach it in a way that people enjoy, and you can structure to them and have a really good teacher, like, you can change people's lives. And you know, I've been working with people with meditating and I think like people need to be, because you said as well about you can't really do the breath. I don't do the breath too much as well. I do a lot of visualizations, and I do a lot of visualizations for beginners as well, because they have to be they have to go into visualization before they can go into breath, because it can't panic them as well. But if you teach them really, really young in a really good way, meditation and mindfulness can be their absolute superpower. Meditation, mindfulness, and compassion, especially love and kindness meditation in children, can just change everything about how they grow up and how they perceive people. So what would you implement into, because I know you're doing a lot of work in that area anyway, and you're doing really well, making massive breakthroughs within early childhood education and meditation. So what would you change from, I mean, you're like me, I went to a convent, you went to a brother's, so there was no meditation, there was nothing about mental health as well. So what would you change, and would you want to implement into early childhood studies?
Yeah, it's funny you say that about the convent. Like, it's funny to me, praying was, it's a form of mindfulness, it's spirituality.
Yeah.
And I think it was Freud famously said that religion destroyed spirituality. Institutional religion destroyed spirituality, because spirituality, whatever you're into, whatever your faith, you have absolute respect for it. If it gives you comfort, whether it's mindfulness, Buddhism, Hinduism, whatever it is, if it gives you comfort and you believe in it, that's all that matters. But with kids, so back to kids, we started Lust for Life, 5 years ago, and the aim of it was to use our education system, because the Irish health system is an absolute car crash. It won't be solving the problems. It will not solve the problems that we're seeing in young kids. It's failed young kids time and time again, and our child and adult, the actual system has. The people that work there, of course, are incredible, but we looked at the education system and we went, like, we've got to use this. We have a brilliant system. And so far, we've reached 52,000 students in Ireland. Our aim is to be in every Irish primary school by the end of next year, and in the curriculum by the end of the year after that. And then you see a generation change. You see a shift.
Yeah.
So my PhD is in the evaluation of early intervention. And it's not just mindfulness, it's emotional intelligence. It's also, I say to parents that mindfulness that I teach to young kids is not mindfulness, it's the language of emotion. That's what we're trying to teach kids. So kids can express, feel, understand, and navigate every emotion, the good, the bad, and the ugly of the full spectrum of emotions. And that has a huge impact on children, because when they can express it and they have a platform to express it, everything starts to shift. Everything. So for me, the Lust for Life program, the aim of that is, and I know in Australia, the .B program is the big kind of internationally renowned mindfulness program for primary schools, and it's amazing. But when I was starting my work, I was told that the .B program wasn't culturally relevant to Ireland, which is nonsense. It was just people trying to not let me get this into schools. So we had to design our own Irish program. We then had to evaluate it. So UCD School of Psychology are evaluating the program, and then I will be doing the research in my PhD to say, right, this is how it works. And what I'm doing, Sinead, is I'm taking 200 years of Irish psychological or mental health intervention, 200 years of Irish asylums that were built from 1817 right up to now. And I'm saying, this is how we've been doing it up to this point. And there's still legacies from this system. what we are going to do, and what I believe is the best way forward for mental health, is early intervention. Now, it will not solve all the problems. It absolutely won't. But my God, it will solve a lot more than we're looking at now. And we also need a very strong mental health system to save and help and support people who need it. But what we need is to get in there. But the problem with that, Sinead, is you go into a school like I did in Dublin's inner city, and you're doing mindfulness programs, and then you realize 10 kids in the class are homeless, and you start feeling like a fool, because you're like, well, what the fuck did it, like, now I feel like and that's the problem, in a country that is perceived as the richest country in Europe. This isn't Ireland bashing. I love this country. This isn't politician bashing. I don't believe they're bad people. I just don't think they understand how truly important it is now to get this right.
Yeah.
Because we have this generation that can destroy the stigma that destroyed my generation. And we got to do everything we can to help them. So that's what the Lust for Life Schools program is. And it's free. No school has to pay for this. Not a penny, not a cent. It is completely free. It is it's a Netflix model for schools. So it's scalable. It can be across the world. Any charity that wants to put their schools programs on it can go onto this framework that we've created. So yeah, it is the key to my work is I am not a problem admiration society. I can't just be a shouter and a stone thrower. I have to figure out what the fuck can I bring to the table, and what can a Lust for Life bring to the table. And this is what we think is the best thing I can do, and the best thing the charity can do. So I'm delighted it's going well. And kids, so the research you're seeing around mindfulness and the likes of, Brett, and saying we haven't done it in schools. They haven't done it in schools because it's hard. Yeah. It's really hard to do it in schools. It's hard to do research in schools. But I have got 55,000 students that I can do a research piece on at a PhD. I am in a really unique position to be able to get golden level of research. And we also have these amazing teachers that I will fight for all day, every day. I'm sick of hearing people giving out about them on radio shows and all this, that. They're healthcare professionals and teachers are the two most important people in our society.
Yeah, I always say that as well, because, I'm always fighting for, all this going into schools. And then why would we ever expect teachers to implement it and have more work whenever we need professionals coming in to do it?
Yeah, and it's funny you say, like, in I know your audience is everywhere, but Ireland isn't unique. So it's important to point that out. It's not us saying this is what's happening. It's not that unique. Mental health systems generally around the world aren't particularly good, because for two reasons. Most of them are predominantly just the medical model. It's the only show in town in many of the mental health, and the medical model is absolutely important. Of course, it's part of the equation. The problem is most mental health systems, it's the only part of the equation. You're seeing people like Gabor Mate now and people like that talking about trauma-informed care and the importance of the first question you should ask somebody who comes in who's struggling is not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you? What happened to you? What happened to you? That has to be the first port of call, whether it's mindfulness, whether it is psychological intervention, whatever it is. And that's how we need to change the systems globally. I mean, I'm sure there are systems that are a bit more humane than ours. And Australia obviously is known for having a pretty decent health system compared to what we have. But yeah, in terms of mental health, that's the reason I want to do further my studies, is to kind of show what I think is early intervention, and real early intervention. What does that look like? How do we use education? How do we stop people getting to the point of crisis that we're seeing now all over the bloody world?
Yeah, because I know a lot of people that worked in mental health, especially probably UK, Ireland. A few of my friends worked in mental health, but they literally quit their job and went down to early intervention because they were like, what is the point of this person coming to me and all I can do for them is give them medication, whenever we could go in the bottom and show them how to deal with their emotions and how to have compassion and stuff like that, and go down the bottom. And then as they grow up, they can be able to deal with their own stuff. And if it gets to this point, there's just going to be less and less people, looking for mental health care. And they're like, when it's later in life, if they know how to handle it in the early childhood, I suppose.
I mean, it's, this is complex. I get it. It really is complex, and it's layered, and it's this and it's nuanced and stuff like that. And I do think our politicians care about it. I don't think I
Yeah.
just don't think they know what to do. I think that's the big fear here. And this is where we have to be collective. We can't, there's too much in the world. Like, I have no political kind of leanings. I don't really care too much, in terms of mental health. I don't think any of them, it's the Pandora's box really that nobody wants to open. And that's the reality. I mean, actually funny when you start to look back into the Irish historical relationship with mental health. In the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, Ireland had the highest level of people in psychiatric hospitals globally. We put so many people into these institutions. And when I started to do my kind of research on it, a lot of the reasons people ended up in institutions, unfortunately, weren't because there was something wrong with them. It was because they came from poverty, or their families couldn't take care of them, or they might have been just a little different. They might have been, just a little left of center, like many of, my mates
Yeah.
were growing up, but they were all just put into institutions, and most of them stayed there, never got out and died there. 33,000 people died in those institutions. So these are the realities of a failed system. And unfortunately, we still have legacies from those systems. And that's what I'm really passionate about. So mindfulness for me is definitely part of what we can do, especially at early intervention level. It is definitely something that can really benefit people just to get through, stress and work and stuff like that. But there's more to this. And human beings are complex. And sometimes you need a little bit more help. You need somebody to help you work through your shit. Sometimes so much is being put on your shoulders, and nobody could carry all of that. And ultimately, what I'm trying to teach is not mindfulness as well. It's don't repress and internalize pain. We need to create a society that doesn't let us do that. And some of that's up to us as individuals, but a lot of it's up to culture and society, so we can become comfortable with each other's pain.
Yeah.
You don't force people to internalize and repress and pretend it doesn't exist. And part of that's mindfulness. Part of that's your ability to sit with that pain yourself, or that fucking joy. I hate talking about pain, but that was the big changing point for me in mindfulness, was the ability. The thing that terrified me the most, I was like, I can sit with this. This isn't knocking me for dead. I'm oh my God. And that changed my life, because I had so much joy in my life. I have a fantastic family. I've all, the bells and whistles. I've a brilliant life, and I've always celebrated that. There was just something that didn't let me really let go. And until I learned to sit with that thing, nothing was going to change. So there's people listening to this who are going through all sorts of shit in their life and have gone through stuff. And the one message I want you to understand is that there are people who are so good at what they do, who have heard it all and will never judge you, that can help you work through that. And, I work with them every day. Incredible professionals that want to help people. We need to create a system that anybody listening to this who needs help can get it whenever they want and however they need it. And that's the utopia, but that's what we got to aim for. And mindfulness to me is a huge part of that. It really is. But I think it's important to make sure it's not the only part of it.
Yeah. I'll try not to keep you too long, but let's end on a little bit of a high, and let's talk about maybe like a little success story of, how it's going, like Lust for Life clients, like children, how they're taking the programs and how they're, able to deal with their emotions.
Yeah, I think it's when you see it, when you actually witness it. And like, I remember like even flying to America about 2 years ago, I have this technique that I use called the magic moment technique for kids. And it's just it's a physical cue that kids can use that allows them focus on their breath, but it really is quite effective. And it's a kind of a technique I kind of design myself, and I love it. And I was flying to America, and I don't sleep in planes. I'm a terrible sleeper in planes. And I could find myself, fuck man, I'm falling asleep here. This is amazing. Like, if I sleep on this flight, I'm winning. Amazing. And I could feel somebody looking at me as I was falling asleep. I was like, oh, I could sense somebody was standing beside my chair. So I kind of opened my eyes reluctantly, and there was this little kid doing the magic moment beside me, and she was just kind of
Oh,
shaking a little bit, and she goes, "I don't like flying." And I went, "Oh well." There was two seats beside me, so sit down there beside me. I'll show you a few more tricks. Like, she had the book, and she sat down. and showed her these other techniques, and then about 10 minutes later, this little girl was sound asleep, and I was wide awake. Then, of
oh.
course, I got awake, but her parents came up to me, and it was like she was so nervous, like the whole thing, and it was just the key to that, Sinead, is you validate her fear. You don't dismiss
Yeah.
it or tell her not to feel what she already feels. The other one I remember that had this huge personal one for me was my nephew Billy. And Billy coming into my life changed my life. He was the big catalyst for change for me. And Billy was really getting really anxious for a while. We didn't really know why, and especially he was young, he wasn't fully communicating it. So me and Billy are very close. So I said to him, "I tell you what, Billy, I'm going to pick you up from school every Friday." And he loves me picking him up from school. I said, "But there's only one rule, that when I pick you up, you're not allowed to. You need to talk for 15 minutes. I'm not allowed to talk." He was like, "What?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm not allowed to talk. You have to talk, and I'm going to put a timer on and everything." So I put the timer on, I get into the car, and he just starts talking. Complete nonsense half the time. But it came out because I gave him space. I didn't jump in, I didn't interrupt him, and I gave him space. And he goes, "You know what scares me a lot, Niall?" I said, "What?" He goes, "I always think mummy's not going to pick me up from school." And he was terrified that his mother, and there's loads of psychological reasons maybe for that, behind that, things like attachment and all sorts of stuff. He's very close to his mum. And rather than go, "Of course she's going to pick you up from school, Billy. That's a silly thing to think," I went, "Oh God, that must feel really scary. Oh yeah, I can know now. I know why you're a bit anxious. I tell you what though, I'm going to give the teacher my number, and if my sister can't pick you up, I'll be there for you. I'll pick you up." And that was it. Done.
Yeah.
Validated his fear. Didn't make him feel silly for having his fear. Gave him a solution to his fear, and in fact, didn't give him a full solution to it. I just said sometimes she'll be late, and stuff like that. And I remember just seeing it in him, and that was the big catalyst for me with kids. It's just, if you can create platforms to validate what they're feeling. Now, it's really important. Like psychologists will tell you, my partner's psychologist, and I work with Dr. Mally Coyne. She says you cannot solve kids' problems. They have to. You can't put them in bubble wrap. They have to fuck up. They gotta make mistakes. They have to do all that stuff. But when you validate how they're feeling, that's
Mm.
really powerful for them. And what I always say to kids is like, and I'll finish with this, a really brilliant technique that you can use, especially for kids, but also for adults, is I get a kid to visualize being in a park, and you go up to the pond, and there's a pond in the park, and there's loads of fish in the pond. And you said, "That fish is really sad. That fish is really scared. That fish is really happy and excited. That fish is confused. And you go through all the fish, and then you say to the kid, be the pond." And in that moment, there is, because you can be, there's room for all of those things, all those weird little emotions, happiness, fear, anxiety. Be the pond, hold them all. You can do that. And I think saying that to a child, what you do is you normalize, and you tell them that these uncomfortable feelings are normal. They're not nice. Nobody likes them, but they're normal, and we all experience them. And that helps children unbelievably. It helps adults. So that's the one thing I will say. Be really careful with the narrative and messaging around, things like positivity and stuff. Being negative, being a little bit lost is okay. It's actually really important. And also, it's important to highlight that resilience, a word that we hear a lot of, resilience is not resilience is the ability to come back from adversity. It is not the ability to ignore adversity. And unfortunately, I think that's the way that word is being used now. I'm resilient because I'm not overwhelmed by the world. That is not resilience. That's avoidance. It's a totally different thing. Resilience is when you're knocked in your hole and you find a way back. And you do it again. That's resilience. And that to me is the most powerful of all things. Avoidance is not. So I think that's what I've learned through mindfulness. And I think we can teach kids, adults, big kids, little kids. We're all fecked up in our own little way, and it's
Mm-hmm.
okay. I think that's what I'm trying to tell people.
Yeah. And I'm reading a book at the minute, and the first line was "Life is difficult." You know what I mean? Like that was like the first line, and it's all about how you're able to come back from that, just like as you said as well. And sometimes you can look at the this lens, like everything should be positive, you should be grateful for everything, but life is about suffering and it's about problem solving, and when you come back, you always come back stronger, and that's what resilience is about. So that was, and
suffering is the first noble truth
yeah,
of Buddhism, you know, and
yeah,
people go, God, but no, think about it. We all, like, as soon as you let go of the need to have a perfect life or a straight line of a life, actually it becomes a hell of a lot more enjoyable. It
yeah,
really does. You take that, and that's the thing. Rick Hansen has this amazing quote. He said, happiness is like Velcro. And no, happiness is like Teflon, and sadness is like Velcro. We kind of take the bad stuff and we really hold on to it. Just be free and easy with all of it. Happiness is
yeah,
going to come, it's going to go. Sadness is going to come, it's going to go. And it's the transience of that. It's the dynamic nature of the mind and emotion. The mind is not stable. Thoughts literally just flow through you. And it's the Suzuki quote I probably should have started with: open your front door, open your back door, and let your thoughts walk through the house. Just don't invite them for tea. And that's what you're trying to do. You just let them come and go. They're not stable. They'll fucking be gone before you know it. So don't let them wield that much power over you, and do not invite those feckers for tea.
yeah. Oh, I love that. Thank you so much. And before we finish, where can people find you? Where can we help with your charity? You know, where can we get your books and, you know, any programs that you've got going on?
Yeah, well, the Where's My Mind podcast is back, new season on Emanada Media, which I'm delighted with. It feels like they're my family. They're the kind of platform I've been chasing for a long time. And yeah, so the Where's My Mind podcast is back. You can get that across all podcast platforms. And it's basically a podcast about how we can better take care of the beauty and the beast of the mind in the head melty chaos of the modern world. And yeah, we're also doing 31 days of mindfulness throughout January on Emanada as well. So it's meditation every day with kind of an education piece on it. So you can sign up for that. There's a free trial for that. And also, if you're in Ireland, I'm doing my Where's My Mind live. After 2 pulled tours, I've had to cancel 2 tours because of, I won't mention the word, but yeah, I had to pull 2 tours, and I finally got the nerve to book the 3 Olympia in Dublin on Friday, the 28th of April, 2023, to do the show. So yeah, I was shitting it because it was so heartbreaking having to announce a tour,
Yeah.
write a show, pull a show. I didn't want to do it again, but anyway, I'm doing it again. It's in the Olympia, so if you're around, come to the live show. It'll be a belter of a night, bit of crack, we have an amazing guest as well that I can't actually say yet because he hasn't confirmed, but it's a he. That's all I can tell you.
Oh, amazing. Well, thank you so much. Honestly, it's been amazing. And it's just so nice to actually see you well, not meet you in person, but see you on Zoom. Because I've always looked up to you and a wee bit of a fangirl. So
thank you for all the work you're doing.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on, and thanks for listening.